The cold air swept through the streets of Fremont, California, as the city's hustle carried on like any other day. The Tesla Gigafactory stood tall in the distance, a beacon of innovation and progress. Inside the towering structure, hundreds of workers hustled to meet deadlines, their faces etched with a mix of pride and exhaustion. They were the lifeblood of the company, but for many, their struggles were hidden beneath the surface, hidden from the man whose name the world chanted as a symbol of genius and ambition. Elon Musk stood in front of a cracked mirror in a dimly lit motel room just miles away from his factory. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the tattered hoodie that hung loosely on his frame. His usually sleek haircut was now messy, his face adorned with a scruffy beard that made him almost unrecognizable. The disguise wasn't just physical, it was mental. Elon had spent weeks obsessing over the idea, sleepless nights haunted by a single question. Do they truly believe in the mission, or is it just survival? He slipped a worn pair of shoes onto his feet and grabbed a battered backpack filled with nothing but a few essentials. His wallet, his phone, his identity, all left behind. Today he wasn't Elon Musk, the billionaire visionary. Today he was Nathan, a homeless man searching for a better life. The factory gates loomed ahead as he approached. Workers streamed in, some laughing, some silent, and others visibly weary. He felt a pang of guilt. Was he so disconnected from their world that he needed to do this to understand them? A worker in his late 50s, with a slight limp and a kind face, held the gate open for him. "You work here, man?" the worker asked, eyeing Elon's disheveled appearance. Elon hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Just started. Got a night shift." The man gave him a knowing look. "Night shift's tough. Good luck out there. Name's Ray, by the way." Elon nodded and mumbled, "Nathan." The first few hours inside the factory were a whirlwind. The roaring machines, the relentless pace, and the sharp barks of supervisors demanding more output. It was nothing like he'd imagined. He'd always envisioned his factories as places of empowerment, where workers felt proud of their contributions. But here, amid the clamor and chaos, he saw something else: desperation. At one point, Elon found himself at the assembly line next to a young woman named Mia. She couldn't have been older than 25, yet her eyes carried the weight of someone much older. "First day?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the machinery. "Yeah," Elon replied, fumbling with a piece of equipment. Mia chuckled. "You'll get the hang of it. Just don't let Frank catch you slipping up. He's the supervisor." As if summoned by her words, Frank appeared, his booming voice cutting through the noise. "Mia, quit chatting and get back to work. And you," he jabbed a finger at Elon, "if you can't keep up, you're out." Elon bit back a retort. He wasn't here to argue or assert his authority. He was here to observe, to learn. But Frank's words stuck with him. Was this how his workers were treated every day? During a break, Elon sat outside with a small group of workers. They huddled together, sharing sandwiches and stories. He listened as Ray recounted how he'd been working for Tesla for over a decade, yet still struggled to make ends meet. "Don't get me wrong, Sharon, Mana," Ray said, biting into his sandwich. "I'm proud of what we do here. But sometimes, I wonder if the big guy upstairs even knows what it's like down here." Elon's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but he stayed silent. Mia chimed in, her voice laced with frustration. "It's not just the pay, though. It's the pressure, the constant fear of messing up and losing your job. Doesn't matter how hard you work, you're just a number here." As the days went by, Elon became more attuned to the struggles of his workers. He saw Ray limping through his shifts, refusing to take breaks because he couldn't afford to lose any hours. He saw Mia hiding her tears after being berated by Frank. He saw the exhaustion, the fear, the quiet resilience of people who had given everything to his vision. One night as he walked back to the motel, Elon spotted Mia sitting on a bench, her head in her hands. He hesitated before approaching her. "Hey," he said softly. She looked up, startled, then sighed. "It's you. Nathan, right?" "Yeah." He sat down next to her. She hesitated, then blurted out, "I'm pregnant." Elon's eyes widened. "I haven't told anyone," she continued. "Not even my boyfriend. I'm scared, Nathan. I can barely take care of myself, let alone a baby." Elon's heart ached. He'd always prided himself on being a problem solver, but this wasn't a problem he could fix with innovation or technology. Have you thought about talking to HR? Maybe they can help. She cut him off with a bitter laugh. HR. They don't care. To them, I'm just another replaceable worker. If they find out, they'll probably fire me for being a liability. Her words stayed with him long after she left. This was more than a business problem. It was a human problem. And for the first time in years, Elon felt powerless. As his week undercover came to an end, Elon stood outside the factory, watching as the workers streamed in for another day. He thought about Mia, Ray, and the countless others whose faces he'd seen, but whose stories he'd never know. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd failed them, not as a boss, but as a leader. Little did he know, the truth about Nathan was closer to being uncovered than he realized. Elon woke up to the sound of rain hammering against the motel window. The week had been grueling, and his body ached in ways he hadn't experienced in years. The factory work, the long hours, the endless grind. It was a life far removed from the comfort of boardrooms and sleek Tesla prototypes. Yet as he stared at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was closer to understanding his workers than he'd ever been. He reached for the scruffy jacket he'd been wearing all week, slipping it on as he prepared for another shift. But something felt different today. There was an edge in the air, an uneasiness he couldn't quite place. By the time he arrived at the factory, whispers were already spreading through the break room. A worker named Luis, one of the more outspoken ones, had been abruptly fired that morning. The reason? Allegedly speaking out against unsafe working conditions during a team meeting. Mia leaned over to Elon as they stood near the coffee machine, her voice low. They're making an example out of him. It's how they keep us in line. Elon frowned. He hadn't heard about any complaints regarding safety. But then again, the layers of bureaucracy within the company often meant issues never reached his desk. Did he say something big? Elon asked, keeping his tone casual. Mia shrugged. He called out the lack of proper ventilation in the battery assembly area, said it's making people sick, but no one listens until someone faints or worse. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. How could something this serious be happening under his watch? He'd spent years preaching about building a better future. Yet here, in his own factory, people were being punished for trying to protect themselves. As the day wore on, Elon's unease grew. He watched as workers pushed through their shifts with grim determination, the shadow of Luis's firing hanging over them. He tried to stay focused, to blend in, but his mind was racing. How many other complaints had gone unheard? How many other workers were quietly suffering, afraid to speak out? That night, during a rare quiet moment in the factory, Elon found himself alone with Ray. The older man was stacking parts with the precision of someone who'd been doing it for years, his movements steady despite the limp in his step. Ray, Elon said cautiously, can I ask you something? The older man paused, wiping sweat from his brow. Sure, kid. What's on your mind? Why do you stay? I mean, if it's this bad, why not leave? Ray chuckled, a sound that was equal parts humor and resignation. Because it's not just a job, Nathan. It's a lifeline. I've got a wife at home with medical bills piling up, and my son's trying to get through college. Walking away isn't an option. Besides, he added, his expression softening, I believe in what we're doing here. It's not perfect, but we're building something that matters. That's worth sticking around for, even when it gets tough. Elon felt a lump rise in his throat. Ray's words were a stark reminder of the weight his workers carried, the sacrifices they made for a dream that was supposed to belong to all of them. But as much as he admired Ray's resilience, he couldn't ignore the cracks in the system. The fear, the exhaustion, the growing sense of disillusionment. It was all too much. Over the next few days, Elon began piecing together the full picture. He listened carefully to conversations, observed interactions between workers and supervisors, and even ventured into areas of the factory he'd never paid much attention to before. What he found was a mix of pride and pain, innovation and exploitation. The workers believed in Tesla's mission, but they were being pushed to their limits, and when they dared to speak up, they were silenced. The breaking point came during a team meeting one evening. Frank, the hard-nosed supervisor, was addressing a group of workers, his tone sharp and condescending. We're behind schedule again, he barked. If you can't keep up, there's the door. Plenty of people would kill for your jobs. Elon felt his fists clench at his sides. He knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. Maybe the problem isn't the workers, he said, his voice steady but firm. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. Frank's expression darkened. What did you say? I said maybe the problem isn't the workers, Elon repeated. Maybe it's the way they're being treated, the way they're being pushed beyond their limits without proper support. You expect them to give everything, but what are you giving them in return? Frank took a step toward him, his face twisted in anger. Who the hell do you think you are? Before Elon could respond, Mia spoke up. He's right. We're not machines, Frank. We're people, and we deserve to be treated like it. One by one, other workers began chiming in, their voices rising in a chorus of frustration and defiance. Elon watched in awe as the room transformed. The workers, who had been so afraid to speak out, were finally finding their voices. But the moment was short-lived. Frank slammed his clipboard onto the table, silencing the crowd. Enough! This isn't a democracy. You either do your jobs or you're out. Elon knew he'd pushed too far. The tension in the room was palpable as Frank stormed out, leaving the workers to exchange uneasy glances. As the shift ended, Mia approached Elon, her expression a mix of gratitude and fear. You shouldn't have done that. Frank's not the kind of guy who lets things slide. I had to, Elon replied simply. Someone had to. But deep down, he knew Mia was right. He'd exposed himself, drawn attention to himself in a way that couldn't be undone. And as he left the factory that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. The disguise, the lies, the secrets. It was all starting to unravel, and the consequences were about to hit harder than he ever imagined. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the factory floor. Elon stood outside the gates, his heart pounding as he replayed the events of the past week in his mind. The confrontation with Frank had been a turning point, but it had also made him a target. Every step he took now felt like walking on thin ice. As he entered the factory for what he knew would be his final shift, the air felt heavier than usual. Workers exchanged wary glances, their usual conversations replaced with nervous silence. Elon could feel the tension, the unspoken fear that had gripped everyone since Luis's firing and the confrontation in the meeting room. Midway through the shift, Elon noticed Frank and a man he didn't recognize talking in hushed tones near the supervisor's office. The stranger was sharply dressed, his eyes scanning the factory floor with a calculating gaze. Elon's instincts told him this wasn't just another corporate visit. Something was wrong. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind was racing. Were they on to him? Had someone figured out who he really was? The thought sent a chill down his spine. During a break, Mia pulled him aside, her face pale. Nathan, she whispered, her voice trembling. They're talking about you. Frank's been digging around, asking questions. He knows you're not who you say you are. Elon's chest tightened. Did he say anything to you? She shook her head. No, but Nathan, you need to leave. If they find out. Before she could finish, the factory intercom crackled to life. Nathan, report to the supervisor's office immediately. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Elon, their gazes a mix of curiosity and concern. He forced himself to stay calm as he walked toward the office, every step feeling like a march to his own execution. Inside, Frank was waiting, his arms crossed and a smug expression on his face. The sharply dressed man stood beside him, holding a tablet. Close the door, Frank said, his voice dripping with false politeness. Elon complied, his mind racing. He knew this was it, the moment everything would come crashing down. Frank leaned against the desk, his eyes narrowing. You know, Nathan, something about you never quite added up. The way you talk, the way you act, it's not exactly ordinary. Elon stayed silent, his face expressionless. The man with the tablet stepped forward, holding up a picture. It was a grainy image of Elon entering the motel a week ago, taken from a security camera. You've been sloppy, the man said, his tone cold. Did you really think no one would notice? Elon's heart raced. They knew. There was no point in denying it anymore. He straightened his posture, shedding the guise of Nathan like an old coat. I didn't come here to deceive anyone, he said calmly. I came here to understand. Frank laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Understand? Is that what you call it? Pretending to be one of us? Sneaking around, stirring up trouble? You call it trouble, Elon shot back, his voice steady. I call it exposing the truth. This factory isn't just a place where cars are built. It's where lives are shaped, futures are forged, and right now it's broken. Frank's smirk faltered, but the man with the tablet remained unfazed. Do you think anyone will care about your little experiment? The man asked. You've jeopardized your reputation, your company. For what? A few disgruntled workers? Elon took a step forward, his eyes blazing. They're not just workers. They're people. And if Tesla's future means stepping on the very people who make it possible, then maybe it's not the future I want to build. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. For a moment it seemed like the confrontation would end there. But then Frank's radio crackled, a frantic voice on the other end. There's a crowd gathering outside. Workers. They're demanding to speak with you. Frank's face darkened as he grabbed the radio. What the hell are they doing? Tell them to get back to work. Elon turned toward the door, a sense of purpose rising within him. Number, let them speak. Ignoring Frank's protests, Elon stepped out onto the factory floor, where a group of workers had gathered. Ray was at the front, his usually calm demeanor replaced with quiet determination. We know who you are, Ray said, his voice steady but firm. And we know why you're here. But this isn't just about you, Elon. It's about all of us. The workers murmured in agreement, their voices growing louder. Elon raised his hands, signaling for silence. You're right. This isn't about me. It's about all of us. And I promise you, things are going to change. Starting today. The room erupted into applause, the tension replaced with a sense of hope and unity. But Elon knew this was just the beginning. There were battles ahead, against people like Frank, against the system that had allowed these injustices to persist. As he left the factory that night, his disguise discarded and his identity revealed, Elon felt a strange mix of relief and resolve. He had seen the truth, and now it was up to him to act on it. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was truly building something. Not just for the future, but for the people who made it possible.